Hey there, I'm Thea Dudley, also known as the Credit Overlord, and welcome to LBM Talks Credit. We are the only podcast that talks trade credit in the lumber and building material space. Never miss an episode, stay tuned, and we're glad you're here. Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of LBM Talks Credit. This is the only podcast you can go to talk about trade credit specifically to the lumber and building material space. I'm Thea Dudley, your host, also known as the Credit Overlord, and we are kicking off another edition talking about fraud. Now, for those of you that haven't tuned into us before, this is all things trade credit, whether it's processing credit apps, AR management, collections, whether you're a beginner, whether you're a seasoned professional, we have something for everybody. And although we love putting out the webinars once a month, I love doing those webinars with you. You guys come up with some amazing topics and you come up with some great questions along with the credit advice column. Love getting your questions on those. But let's face it, sometimes you can't wait for a column or for a webinar. You need to talk about what's happening right now, and fraud is so timely. So this is a huge challenge for credit professionals, not only in our space, but for everybody across the country. I don't know one business that's not affected by it. So one of the things I look forward to every year, I'm almost embarrassed to say that I look forward to this every year because it makes my world sound so small and so dull. I got to get some better hobbies. Right around the second week of June, the Payment Fraud and Control Survey comes out. And the Association for Financial Professionals puts this out, and they do it in conjunction with Truist Bank. And this report's been done for the last, 20 years. 5,000 Treasury professionals participate in it. And so it really has some great consistency, and you can kind of see the trends year over year. And so you've got stuff to compare it to. I love when surveys come out, but I always want to know, okay, what's happening? What was the year before? What was it 5 years? Is there a trend? Is this cyclical? Same reason that I like tracking KPIs. I like seeing what the DSO is doing, year over year. But I digress. Let's talk about the highlights from this particular survey. So 80% of organizations reported that they had payment fraud attacks or attempts of some type in 2023. That's a 15% increase from the year before. I think that's a ton. Sally, you really? 15%? That's a lot. Okay, for those of you that don't know and have never met Sally, Sally is our producer here for LBM Talks Credit. She does an amazing job. And she's new to credit. She's new to our, in fact, she's learning a lot about credit that she didn't really want to know. So I'm trying to channel her in a credit professional. And then, maybe we can actually, I think Rick would kill me if I turned you into a credit manager, but girls got to hope, girls got to dream. So 15% seems like a lot, doesn't it? Yeah, at 15% is amazing. And checks continue to be the most vulnerable to fraud. Now, you all remember check fraud, especially when there was like check washing. Someone would steal a check out of your mailbox. They would wash it, it goes through like a little solution, takes off the ink from it, and they let it dry, and then they can repurpose it and make checks for stuff you did not know you wanted to pay for. So 65% of the respondents to this survey reported that their organization had check fraud. That's 65%. That's over half. Those are not good odds. Anything that's more than half is bad. So it continued to go on with fraud due to interference by the post office. I love how we politically corrected that. Interference by the post office is up 10%. So that's somebody stealing out of a post office box, your mailbox, could be a letter carrier, could be somebody in the post office. But when they say interference, a lot of times, they don't tell you exactly where the interference is coming from. We're going to talk more about that. 20% of respondents in this survey said that they had some type of fraud going on with this. They had experienced some type of interference with the post office. So whether that was it being taken out of a mail drop or their own mailbox out front. And I know I sound like a broken record. I keep talking about get a payment portal, Pull a credit report. I know that everybody thinks I'm employed or I have like a side gig going with the credit reporting agencies, but a portal is a portal is the best way to combat a lot of these frauds. And we're going to talk, we've only tapped the tip of the iceberg on this. So let's talk a few more highlights. So for the first time in history of this survey, ACH payments surpassed wire fraud as the most vulnerable type for BEC fraud. And BEC is just business email fraud. So now you have old school fraud, like, stealing out of your post office box. But now you have like a little more high tech. Now we're stealing through email. And you guys know what I'm talking about. It's you get a suspicious email. You kind of look at it. You're like, oh, somebody's asking me via email. One of our customers is asking me to change, how we do something, or somebody within our company is saying, hey, we're changing the routing on this. And you don't check it out. Maybe you don't catch it, or somebody hacks into your email and starts sending out stuff to your customer saying, hey, we're suddenly changing something. This is where you need to send your payments now. So ACH is surpassed wire fraud as far as this goes. And even as most payment methods continue to be vulnerable to business email fraud, BEC, payment made via ACH, 47%, and wire transfers, 39%, are the most targeted. So it's easier for someone to get you to switch an ACH because, let's face it, everybody's busy. I know we should all be like watching for phishing, smishing, all kinds of ishings, but it does get overwhelming. Not only do you have to know what's happening in credit, you have to know payment, collections, mechanics liens, joint checks. You've got to deal with collecting money. Now you have to look at every single email that comes in and eyeball it to see if there's a dot where it shouldn't be, or somebody's name is slightly misspelled. But most of us, we look at something, your eye kind of glazes over it and you don't really notice that BEC fraud is happening. So you have to be constantly vigilant on it and, kind of see what's going on. But 47% of ACH, according to this survey, was vulnerable. So it was up almost 8-9% from what wire transfers were. And of the organizations that were victims to payment fraud in 2023, 30% were unsuccessful in recovering funds due to fraud. So 30%. Now, okay, I understand that you're like, okay, well, 70% were successful. Okay, but 30%, that does not feel good when you're in that 30%. That costs a lot of money. That doesn't even count your bad debt. So, now you have bad debt to worry about, but now you have thievery. So, on an up note, 41% of organizations were successful in recovering at least 75% of the funds that were stolen from them. Or they say funds lost. Honey, they weren't lost. They were stolen. Nobody lost them. It's not as common anymore to hear, oh, we lost a check in the mail. It's like, well, I have a solution for that. You could have just paid me on my portal and we could have gotten around all of this. The other thing too is if you're seeing like a business email, it's that BEC fraud. It's really hard to do that fraud through a portal. And I'm going to grab one of our portal contributors and kind of have them talk about a few things there. But we'll save that for another episode. But that's our bright note. Our bright note is 41% of organizations were successful in getting at least 75%. So less than half got more than half. I don't really like those odds. I might as well just go to Vegas and gamble the company's money. So that's our bright note. Less than half of the organizations impacted. So if that's not depressing enough, if that's not enough to make you go, everybody just needs to pay me COD. The post office is not a secure bet for mailing your checks. I know I kind of alluded to that earlier in this podcast, but on July 11th, news came out that 2 former postal workers abused their positions to allegedly, and let me quote this, allegedly pull off one of the biggest thefts at JFK International Airport. So the charges allege that there were, 5 defendants stole, sold, and fraudulently deposited millions of dollars in U.S. Treasury checks, which, included, pandemic relief and some other like IRS payments for their own benefit. So of those 5, 2 were former postal workers. So they knew how the system worked and how to get in it. There was also a case in Montgomery where a former postal service employee was convicted of stealing checks and documents from the mail. Okay. And then in the Houston area, another case involved a man who stole mail, including checks from U.S. Postal Service's collection boxes. Now, he was sentenced to federal prison for possession of stolen and aggravated identity theft. But whether it's the post office or somebody outside of the post office stealing your checks, I want to cut that whole section out of this process. It's like if I could just take the post office out of my business, that would be great. I want to do everything via portal. And I know that sounds contradictory to what I just said about email fraud, but if I have a portal in place, there would be no reason for, even if somebody got an email from us that said, hey, we're changing our routing. It's like, well, I can go into your portal and see that nothing has changed. I can see that everything is still going. I want to be able to put a link out there, whether it's ACH, whether it's credit card. And I hear you on the credit card. I know that 3% is a lot to give up, but can I roll you back to these numbers where 41%, less than half, recovered 75%, and that was our bright note? So one way or another, you're going to pay, or, well, we haven't experienced fraud, so it's okay. It's like, well, it's okay now. It's a lot different story when it turns out that it was you that got stolen from. It is a beast to collect from. I was involved with a company where we ended up having almost $500,000 stolen. And it took 2 years, about 1,000 man hours. And yes, we did recover about $18,000, all but $18,000 of it. But at what cost? You have all those employee man hours. You've got this blanketed bunch of money for 2 years. So the value of your money, even though it was great to get it back, with no help from the post office, no help from federal government. So the more I can do to cut any third party out of that has hands in place, portals are like little robots. They just go right through. So now that I've depressed everybody, and I think everybody's kind of like, okay, I'm going to start day drinking because this is now my job. What can you do? I know I just harped on you to utilize payment portals for all customer payments that you possibly can, preferably something with 2-factor authentication so that it makes it, hey, they have to log into the portal to be able to see their account. It's not just, hey, I'm sending you this so somebody can, you've got that extra layer in case you do get hacked. So pay close attention to emails that request change banks, routing numbers, changes to payments. All of those things should be a clue. I know everybody's busy. I know I'm not going to say that you're going to catch every little thing, but the more vigilant you can be, the more alert and the more suspicious. Anytime someone asks me to change something like that, it's, hey, that's not normal. Why are we doing that? That seems out of the blue. And most of the time a company will call you or something will come out on a company letterhead and they'll talk about, hey, we're moving from pushing out checks to ACH. We need you to log in and authorize your account or set up your account. They're going to be asking for something. There's going to be something on their letterhead. They're not just going to send out some random email. So pay close attention to any details in those emails. Normally, a random email is not how companies roll out changes for banking or payment request habits. Check the email address that the email came in from really close. When you read, say you do get something like that, look at it. You can see those ones. I think everybody gets those ones from, hey, your package is being delivered. And, it's like, oh, I'm getting a package. You didn't order something. You're not getting a package. So don't click on the invoice. Don't, automatically respond. That's not happening. So check where it's coming from closely. Fraudsters change little details and they usually have spelling errors. It's like, okay, if you're going to BS me, could you get a thesaurus or a dictionary and maybe, turn a phrase a little better or spell check? Microsoft has spell check. Everybody has it. Consistently review your AR for past dues. You can find out if somebody who is suddenly paid on time and they've been going along just great and now they're late. That could be a missing check. And the sooner you identify that, the better. So if you call somebody, you've got a customer you call and you're like, hey, normally you guys pay right around this time. I haven't seen anything. I'm just asking because we've experienced some fraud. I know there's a lot going out there. I'm just trying to be vigilant. So a lot of times when you disarm somebody and you tell them, hey, I'm not dunning you. I'm not, hey, you're 1 day past due. What the heck's going on here? I'm just trying to stay on top of things. You guys normally pay around this date. You're running, 4 or 5 days late. This is not normal for you. I'm just a little concerned. And if you don't have cybersecurity training programs for your employees, for your back office processes, you need to you need to consider doing that. It is a small price to pay to invest to educate your employees. It's got to be consistent, and you've got to have conversations about this type of situation with your employees, with your team, so they know what to watch for. And taking a couple of extra minutes to double check the email, double check the message, hey, send it to your IT department. This looks suspicious. I hate to sound like a paranoid, or I think everybody's out to get me, but I'd rather be safe and waste a few minutes of IT's time than to have the whole company going, thanks a lot, Thea. Whole company shut down. We can't get back up for weeks. And now our system's been hacked because you had to click the button, or we lost a bunch of money because you ended up changing some things that you shouldn't have. So always ask questions. No one's ever going to get mad at you for that. And then there are firms out there that will push training out quarterly with testing to educate your team. And in those situations, you hire them, they deploy training once a month, little scenarios. They make you pick out what you think looks like the fake email. And then they go ahead and let you know, hey, did you pass or fail? And if you failed, you're going to be taking that test again a bunch. So, and speaking from personal experience, if you turn it on and you don't really listen to it and you just try to click the answers, they catch on to you. So those are some things you can do to minimize the fraud, but it is out there. It's powerful. And we didn't even touch on a lot of credit card fraud in this. And we're seeing that on a level all over the country with COD customers coming into branches, and they, maybe they put down a credit card, you run it. Maybe it's a customer you've never seen before. It's some guy, XYZ Houses. He comes in, he's like, here's my card. You don't ask for any type of ID. You just everybody's busy. You take the card. You just assume hey, his boss sent him in with something. It's not my card. My boss sent me in here to buy something. If you've never heard of them before and they're taking materials or they're having it delivered, and next thing you know, a week goes by, somebody files a credit card discrepancy report. Hey, I didn't buy it, I didn't buy $15,000 worth of material from, this yard over here. And then you've got fraud happening. So credit card fraud has been really big. So just keep your eye out for that as well. That is our episode for this particular week. And on behalf of Sally and I, please tune in for our next one, which should be in about, we're running about every 2 weeks. Stop in, send your questions, anything you want to know, anything that's going on in our industry. We are happy to review it with you. This is LBM Talks Credit. I'm Thea Dudley, your host, also known as the Credit Overlord, and we will be talking to you next time about trade credit in the building material space. Until then, happy collecting.